Chapter 5. Gangnam Station. 1. Cock! A beastly sound was heard from below as green blood spluttered out. Taesoon, who had seen this, was scared out of his wits. What is it? Green worm. This place looked like Gangnam train station, but it was not anymore. It copied the looks of the Gangnam train station, but one could look at it as a dungeon, and green worms were one of the most widely spread mobs of the tutorial area. They don't like sunlight, so they stay underground, and they come out after feeling the vibrations above ground. If someone were to be bitten by that somewhat lacking mouth, chunks of flesh getting ripped off was a given. Well, they still give runes. From one point of view, it is very dangerous. If you get bitten once and fall down, you will die without being able to do anything. But there was an easy way to deal with these guys. Hansu ruthlessly hacked down on the heads as he spoke. If you aren't confident, then walk on the unbroken granite. If you see somewhere that's broken and earth is exposed, stab it with your sword. Oh, and be careful of your hand when you stab. Right below the granite was soil, confirming that this place just copied the looks of Gangnam train station. How do you know all of this? As Taesoon asked with a suspicious look, Hansu replied very simply, psychic powers. At those words, the seven who had been eyeing Hansu with a terrified face carefully walked on the granite as they stabbed the areas with exposed soil. Keek! Hansu shook his head at the way they stabbed the earth ruthlessly. 4 of them are useful. 3 aren't quite there yet. Surprisingly, the females were leading. Mihi and Jisun were stabbing the earth with clenched teeth, and Taesoon and Jisun's boyfriend were also stabbing the earth zealously. But the remaining 3 were perhaps afraid of the green worms who came out screaming. They were just watching quietly from the back. Hansu didn't really care about those 3. There was no reason to get upset because they didn't join in on the fight, because the work will eventually fall onto him anyway. Soon there were tiny runes shining everywhere. Hansu was picking the runes that came out from his killings, then turned around and asked with a weird look, "Why aren't you picking them up?" Then Taesoon laughed awkwardly. "No, it's nothing much, but isn't it better for you to take them all? Even in games we do something where we give everything to one person." Everyone nodded a little bit. Just because someone assimilated runes, it didn't mean they would become strong like Superman. But if at the moment they were to get caught by those beastly things and get tetanus or something, then they would just die. If they gave all these runes to Hansu and his protection offers safety, it's a better option. Hansu shook his head at those words. The things you kill, you take. This was not his thoughts. If they were going to become enemies from the start, it wouldn't really matter. But if they are going to travel together, they at least needed some rules. And this was the most basic rule that they followed in order to stay together for decades when roaming around the abyss. As I expected due to it being the start, thinking that they will protect you because they eat the runes is a very flawed idea. Why would they since we're friends? Thoughts like, if I'm this nice to them, they will reward me with something. When a situation where one's life is on the line comes along, a relationship built on each other's likes disappear like bubbles. So far, reality is still in check, but soon after they will realize it. A situation where one's life is in danger isn't far off in this place. In conclusion, the only thing you can trust is your own ability. If you are useless, you will get thrown off immediately. They will realize it eventually, and once they do, they will zealously go for runes and become red-eyed. The above rule was created because of that. I'm not their babysitter, they've got to handle things themselves. At that moment, Taesoon mumbled softly in the corner. Hey, look over here. There's a special rune here. At those words, everyone gathered around. Everyone saw it for the first time, but from instinct, they knew what use this rune had. If one takes this, then they can use skills, huh? Taesoon mumbled as he stole glances at Hansu. The object gives rise to the desire. Before, Hansu coolly said that they should distribute the runes, but if his eyes turn at the sight of these new runes and he says that he will take it, Taesoon had no way of stopping him. Can I really take this? Then Hansu nodded his head. Hansu even knew the identity of that rune. It's a pretty good rune at the start, a rune that made your skin hard and increased regeneration. a rune which increases both defense and regeneration in the beginning where survival is important, and that rune was almost like a passive where learning had no restrictions and didn't take mana. You get more gluttonous, but for the benefit you get, it's worth it. Food can be stolen once you get stronger and won't be a problem. But Hansu shook his head. I cannot learn skills freely. Usually one learned a few tens of skills. It's not erasable, but there isn't really anything you need to give up to learn the skill. The strength of the skill changes according to proficiency and rank, but since there's no risk of learning, there's no harm in learning it. Someone with a good sense and a lot of mana sometimes has over 100, and Keldian had over 1,000. And since he was able to use all those skills properly, he was one of the strongest 4. Kang Tae was the strongest, but if they actually fought, Keldian was not a joke either. But he could not be like that. A nickname given by Eris after seeing his peculiar characteristic. A characteristic that allowed him to catch up to Kang Tae, Keldian, Eris, and stand shoulder to shoulder with them despite starting 20 years late. And the characteristic that was the deciding factor that made the others send him to the past instead of themselves. The time he realized his characteristics was when he first learned a skill. The first skill he learned was, but as soon as the rune was implemented to his body, he knew he made a mistake, which could not be changed. The amount of skills I can learn is exactly 7. To be specific, the amount of runes that was allowed for him was 7. Erez always lamented. The limit of 7 was a huge disadvantage. But more so than that, there's a huge advantage to it. The speed at which the proficiency of the skill rises is surprisingly fast, at an incredible speed, and the skill even breaks the limit and keeps on evolving afterwards. The skill he learned, Dororo Lizard's Essence, which basically just gave fast regeneration, evolved to the point where it was comparable to his immortal technique he learned. Eventually, the Dororo Lizard's Essence was like that. The scrubby skills which he learned as a final resort in order to survive eventually strengthened as he struggled, upgraded to the point of Keldian's Void Ripper, and upgraded to the point where it got as strong as blood magic. In the abyss where a strong skill was important, this was a talent of blessing. And for that, Ares firmly told him before he came back to the fast. Make sure to carefully select before deciding on the 7 skills, and he was thinking of doing that if all went according to his plans. According to my plans, there's nothing before exiting the tutorial area. Then I'm going to learn it? The surrounding friends stared jealously at Tae-soon, who was very happy. And soon, when Tae-soon absorbed the rune, a change occurred. Wriggled Tae-soon's skin temporarily showed a bit of green, then returned. There wasn't much change, but Tae-soon knew the second he learned what kind of change happened to his body. The tired body started to have minuscule amounts of vitality flowing into it, and the skin, which had been grazed by the teeth of the green worm, started to heal. And a newly appeared stat. A stat called physical resistance appeared. Tae-soon touched his ears. Park Tae-soon. Strength, 11-1 agility, 10-1, stamina, 12-5, pa-1-5. Perception, 10-3, physical resistance, 10-7, arrow 7. Ekrol Troll Tribe's Essence. Proficiency, 1.0%. Good. The proficiency was only at 1%, but quite a lot of stats went up dumbass, giving me something like this. If it was him, he would never have given it. Hierarchy should be taken advantage of when it is applicable. I will catch up to you. Tae-soon, who had counted the number of runes, watched Hansu with a confident smile. While Tae-soon was doing that, Hansu checked his stats. Kang Hansu, strength, 15.3 agility, 12.1, stamina, 12.1, perception, 13.2. It's not bad. The level where it was not bad, but rather it was extremely fast-paced compared to the past. Hansu shook his head as he continued forward, but at that moment, Tae-soon came next to Hansu as he spoke. It'll be dangerous from now on, so let's go together. And as Hansu saw Tae-soon steal a glance at he shook his head. There's no way that he's seeing me as a competitor. Actually, this much was cute. In the future, one won't know how it will change. Whatever happens, it isn't bad. Even if they split the runes, the speed was fast, so the rate at which the runes increased was faster compared to when he hunted alone. He was worried that Tae-soon might be in the way, but he was at least working enough for one person. With the 2 as the lead, the 8 kept on going forwards. Thankfully, a little bit of light came through half-broken-down roofs, so there wasn't much issue in going forward, though it was a little hard to see. Quaduduk. Maybe it was because they got greedy after seeing a skill, Everyone was greedily slashing down upon green worms, but they could still not compare to Taesoon and Hansoo's speed. Anyways, that guy doesn't even have a skill, but he's so much faster than me. Taesoon looked at Hansu with a slightly jealous look. Due to the new skill, he could dash in with a little less fear. That was the reason why his hunting speed rose. But that guy ruthlessly dove between green worms as if he was invincible and slashed down on heads. No, I will win. Taesoon, who could not accept that a guy who was quietly stuck in a corner was much better than him, was slashing down on green worms even more zealously than before as he advanced slowly. Mihi cautiously trailed behind and asked Hansu, "But why are we going downwards?" Hansu replied to those words, "To ride the subway." The subway? As Taesoon looked at the collapsing train station with no electricity, he looked at Hansu with suspicion. Chapter 6, Gangnam Station, 2. Hansu thought of the words that Min Chul, who was part of the final brigade, had told him. He asked because it was so spontaneous. "How did you know about it?" And then Min Chul grinded his teeth. It seemed like a simple suggestion, but there was a problem. This train leaves after 1 day, and that's why it was a hidden piece that needed to be solved by today. Just falling into a weird place was enough to shock somebody, but there will not likely be someone who will crawl into the 3rd floor of a monster-filled cave. But just getting to the final brigade meant that you were an abnormal person, and there were about 4 people who knew about this, and they all got something different. But they all received artifacts, and they were all very useful during the beginning. Let's see what comes out. Eventually, Hansu's group had their eyes on the entrance that led further down. Mihi mumbled inwardly, This isn't Gangnam Station." Never had she heard of this entrance while traveling back and forth through Gangnam Station tens of times. "Are you really going in?" When Mihi asked with an anxious look as she looked at the entrance, which permeated a creepier aura, Hansu merely shrugged. "I don't know either. I'm just going by how I feel. By the way, anybody can leave or stop following whenever they want to." If one thought about it, there was not really a reason to follow him down, and there was plenty of game around here too, since there were many green worms left. "I'm going in," Taesoon said confidently first, and Mihi, who was contemplating what to do, said while biting down hard, "I'm going in too." She must be feeling pressured. Hansu nodded his head. She probably understood the situation before. Someone like her is in a more dangerous situation than others. Right now, her face was not a blessing, but a curse. If she wasn't going to slash her face, she needed to get stronger. Would it be enough even if she slashed her face? Hansu shook his head after seeing Mihi's body, which was almost about to burst. Jisun and Gangtae, who were a couple, spoke after staring at each other. "We will stay here. We can just hunt here." Hansu nodded his head. That was not a bad plan at all. It's a good choice to raise your stats while the people higher up are bickering back and forth. And one of the 3 people who were fighting on a small scale, Sang-jin, who was following from behind with a scared expression, opened his mouth as well. "I will go down too." Everyone made a surprised face at those words, but Sang-jin just bit his lips and didn't say anything. And with that, it was decided that 4 will stay and 3 will go down. Hansu ruthlessly moved his body downwards. He said, "It'll be here when I come down." Hansu, who had come down to the 2nd floor, looked around. Before coming here, he had heard everyone's individual tutorial area stories. They were old stories, but due to it being their first impactful experience, everyone remembered it to an extent. The results were all different. The mobs and landscape in the tutorial area comprise of thousands of different kinds, and what was in here was going to be random, but they all had something in common. As I thought, it exists. On the 2nd floor of the train station, a convenience store was always placed there, as if they were rewarding you. "Wah!" Mihi shouted as she approached the store. The lights were off, but there were plenty of goods including fresh water inside. Mihi, Taesoon, and Sang-jin went in and started to collect some necessities. There's even cigarettes. What each took were different. Taesoon took a few kitchen knives that looked like they could be used as a weapon, then found a belt-like object to hold them. Mihi blushed as she gathered a few goods like sanitation pads cautiously in the corner. Hansu, who was looking at that, went into one of the corners of the store. "It's closer to a market than a convenience store." Hansu nodded as he saw pots to Bunsen burners and even portable burners. As Mihi saw Hansu, who was getting ready to boil something in the corner, she asked with a strange look, "Anyways, why did you bring those?" Mihi looked at a pouch in Hansu's hands with a puckery face. Hansu had cut the goblin leather into a suitable size, then brought the blood of the green worm within it. Hansu didn't reply to those words and started to weigh the items on the scale meant for mail. "It's been innovated with extreme detail. Anyways, it was 800 gras of green worm blood and 225 gras of goblin leather." Hansu, who had weighed everything with extreme detail, poured the blood in one pot and then ripped up the goblin leather, put it in the same pot, and proceeded to boil it. Soon, when the blood started to boil, something fascinating happened. The goblin leather started to melt. Good! Green worms, when goblins invaded, bit off the goblins, and then sprayed blood from an injury in its mouth to melt down the leather. And goblins, to retaliate, evolved to counter this. If the blood of the green worm was to touch their leather, it would become poisonous. The two species probably lived in the same area for a long time. Whatever happened, the poison made this way showed a powerful might in the beginning. Hansu started to carefully smear the dark red liquid onto the blade, and Tai-soon, Sang-jin, and Mi-hee, who had gathered around, watched as if it was fascinating. "What is he making?" Tai-soon made a slightly suspicious face as he spoke, and Hansu replied very simply, "It's poison." "How do you know the method?" "Psychic powers. The knowledge is springing up in my head." "Seriously? I thought my head was going to explode while memorizing these." Hansu shook his head as he thought of Keldian and the alchemist, Rahman, who had grilled him. Hansu's magic stat was very high, but just because the magic stat rose did not mean intellect rose. Only that the power of the skill increased. Hansu's information that he had painstakingly learned was called, since even though getting items was important, creating and enhancing them was also of great importance. In the earlier years, there were clans or magi who researched these professionally. Normally, a magi like Keldian learned and produced these, but the other three in the group of the last 4 surviving people, those other than Keldian, went through tons of stress in order to memorize these, though only I survived in the end. Hansu, who was reminiscing the old days, remembered Keldian's words. Keldian firmly told him while handing down the combination methods. Hansu, who had thought up to this point, stole a glance at the 3 who were watching fervently, but shook his head. They won't know even if they see, since if the correct ratio wasn't known and the heating time was not done perfectly, then it would be useless. Hansu emptied a nearby shampoo container, filled it with the liquid he created, then applied it to his sword by squeezing the container. "Is there a possibility that we can use that too?" Hansu nodded as Mi-hee carefully asked. "Of course." And then everyone's faces brightened up, if Hansu didn't follow up with some more words. "One application cost either a 1-2 strength or stamina rune." "Isn't that a bit too petty?" Tai-soon made an annoyed expression. Hansu shrugged his shoulders. "I could just give it to you if I wanted." "But if you look at it on the long term, it doesn't seem like a good choice." Mi-hee nodded after thinking about it for a moment. A one-way relationship will eventually get ruined, and Hansu seemed like a good person to know for long term, or at least he did so far. "I will give the rune to you later. Let me put it on first." Hansu nodded at those words. "What about you guys?" Sang-jin and Tai-soon nodded eventually without a choice. "Since we don't have to give him anything if it isn't that good, or just not use it?" The two thought as they presented their swords. "Careful when you put it on, since there will be severe pain if it gets on your fingers." And at those words, the people who were squeezing the shampoo bottles applied the poison carefully. Hansu added something while staring into the giant bag latched onto their backs. "If you walk around outside with such a big bag, then you will realize why a lure is effective in fishing. If you want to complete it safely, then do it like this. You can't fight with that on anyways." Hansu gathered a bunch of things, then went into a corner where light didn't reach, digged a hole, then buried it. Since they had enhanced bodies and swords, digging in the ground was very swift. Taisun and Sang-jin, who had seen this, started to gather every food item and started to put them into a large bag. Then Hansu shook his head as he saw this. If those all disappear, the guys who come here later will chase us with their lives. Leave some. The two who looked at Hansu with a dissatisfied face started to gather necessities first. Mihi was checking out Hansu thoroughly from afar. I thought he was only quiet. He wasn't only good at fighting. Every single action was extremely reliable, like a professional survivalist. Won't a psychic power like that appear for me as well? It was weird that he had used the excuse of psychic powers since the beginning, but in a world where monsters and creatures exist, something like psychic powers seemed possible. Mihi shook her head after looking at Hansu in a strange way. She was quick to catch on ever since she was small. There were countless millions of people who had gone missing, but not one had come back, which meant it was likely that they were going to spend eternity in this place, and for that, she had to adapt to this place fast. I definitely don't want to die. No, maybe dying was a better alternative in some situations. If nothing works, this wasn't the time to look for a man to protect her, but a final method was always important. Mihi looked at Hansu with a strange look, then followed Hansu, who had gotten out of his seat and proceeded to go deeper into the station while clenching her teeth. Taisun kept on asking Hansu as he saw him walk through the darkness. Is there a way for us to get that psychic power too? At those words, Mihi, who had been staring at Hansu, and even Sang-jin, who had been following quietly, listened in. Hansu nodded at Taisun's words. Maybe. Really? Hansu's knowledge of his own future was not due to psychic powers, but a few people who come in the other world show special skills that they didn't have in the real world. This was called... Keldian gave an explanation about traits in this way. People who had a very good personal trait showed a faster rate of growth than others if they survived the start. His case was a trait called 7 stars. A large variety of traits existed, and very dangerous traits existed among those as well. I need to find those guys, though, Taisun asked with a weird face at Hansu. Why did you get quieter all of a sudden? He didn't really talk about, but he talked even less now. Hansu replied very simply, There aren't many things to talk about. Hansu thought of the annihilation of mankind as he answered. Everyone was at a dried-up state without a moment to talk for the last 5 years. As there were opponents such as the tribes of Abyss who seemed to flood them like water, hope had started to slowly disappear, and thanks to that, a person to talk to rapidly decreased. How could he... Taisun clicked his tongue. Was he a loner during high school? Is that why he learned martial arts? Well, whatever happens, as long as there's possibility for him. Taisun, who had always been in the center of the crowd and who was now in the second man's position, wasn't really used to it. And it wasn't pleasing either. A guy like him developed psychic abilities and can do that much. If it appeared on me, I'd shine even more. And when that happens, he will become the center of the crowd again. Since that guy Hansu is useful, I should keep him by my side. Taisun walked forward with hopeful thoughts.